Welcome to the Stay at Work Home. We are here to question the prevailing assumptions about the meaning of life, work, and the purpose of people. Instead of being torn apart by our vocations, we want to be pulled together. Come along with us as we change our picture of the good life and pursue the home as God intended, one that worships through work together. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Stay at Work Home. I'm Keith.
I'm Becky.
And today we're going to talk about inconvenient things. Inconvenient things seem to get in the way of life.
Mm-hmm.
But inconvenient things kind of are life.
They are.
What inconvenient things happened?
Well, right when we first started the recording, Mercy knocked on the door right after we started.
Yes. Yes, she did.
And it was locked.
Why?
Ugh.
She wanted to give us hugs.
Okay.
Anyway.
So, again, maybe inconvenient because we had to stop or not stop or open the door.
Yeah.
And then we got a hug, which I think in the long run, we will prefer that we've had the hug.
Probably worth it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Otherwise, inconveniently, we had a day that wasn't really free in which we went to a neighbor's house and slaughtered 800 chickens. Are we supposed to say slaughter?
I think we could process them.
Process, right?
That sounds nicer than slaughter.
Yeah.
Even though it's the same thing.
Yeah. How many ways do we know how to slaughter or say the word slaughter in English?
Just a couple.
Not as many as we know in Latin.
That's right.
Anyway, fun joke there. Okay. So we went to our neighbor's house because he needed help.
He did. He had bought, I don't know how many chickens he bought. I think we ended up with like 80 that had to be dispatched.
We did not count them. We should have counted them.
We really don't know how many it was. It was a lot
Not great with accounting.
of chickens. It was a whole lot of chickens, and they were big. They were
kind of
slow, easy to catch because they had so much meat on them they could barely walk. I mean, they could walk. They were like waddle, 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 but it was like fat guy chicken in a little feather coat that doesn't totally cover me because I don't have enough feathers because I'm a meat bird because I'm a modern monstrosity. Anyway, yeah. So we ended up doing it because he had been busy the first week when he was supposed to do it. Something came up, and then he got hurt, and then he just had like a health thing, and he's still in the hospital. It's kind of serious, but hopefully he gets out soon. So it was a serious inconvenience for him to go to the hospital, and then somebody needed to take care of the chickens, so we did that.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out, though it was a ton of work, pretty darn good. And actually, the coolest part was by the end of the day, we had an entire chicken disassembly line manned by people 13 and under.
That was cool.
They were killing them, scalding them, plucking them, cutting off the feet and the heads, and then eviscerating them, and cleaning them off, and putting them in
bags,
cold water and bags.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they could do it all by themselves, which is, that's kind of mind blowing in a way, especially considering prior to this event, only a few of our kids had done it, but none of them had participated from start to finish ever. And definitely hadn't done it unsupervised. And they were a little bit unsupervised for a while I was getting ice and Keith was somewhere else. And so it was, but a few of the other kids had never done it before at all. And so by the end of the day, though, I have confidence that all of these kids, that they would not be intimidated at the prospect of killing a chicken and putting it from, feather on its feet to
from feather to fork.
From feather to fork. Yes.
Well, we didn't do that. I did cooking at that point.
We didn't.
But still, that'd be the easy part.
That's the easy
part.
They
were all pretty familiar with that already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and just even to, our modern food supply, I remember talking to somebody who had been involved in a public school system, and they had, public or private, whatever. Sorry, it had to be the public thing. Getting on to people for that these days. But they were discussing how children have no idea, like they can see something on their plate that they recognize, a tortilla chip or whatever, but they have no idea where that thing comes from. And even things like tomato sliced, they don't necessarily know what the whole fruit or the whole plant would look like. And that, it is a significant modern, it's very new that this kind of thing could actually happen, right? That people could not have a clue where their food comes from, that they don't know where the nuggets that shaped like a dinosaur, what that looked like at the beginning of that nugget, right? And it was squawking and flopping and, had blood that needed to be drained and all of that. So these kids got to see that. And I think some of them, especially, it was a brand new thing for them. And I think they found it, especially the boys, they found it very empowering, I think. And
they gained a great deal of competence and confidence through the experience. Now, the experience was a lot of work. It took all day long, and it was a total inconvenience. Mm-hmm. It was something that was unplanned, but it is also something that brought people together to help, to pull in one direction toward a cause. And it also kind of reminds me of the book Leaf by Nigel.
Since you said that at some point, I can't stop chuckling about it because the neighbor's name is Parish, which supposedly was inconsequential, but a parish is a local, a geographic area around which a church is the center point, mm-hmm. right? So the parish church is a thing, and so you kind of associate parish with pastor, right? And the pastor had these physical needs that disrupted my, whatever busybody needs I had.
It would have been the church, not the pastor, but it would have been the church itself.
Right, right. But it's kind of funny because the analogy is pretty similar. Yeah. But Leaf by Nigel, we discovered that, I don't know, a couple of years ago. And it's a real short story. It's kind of...
by J.R.R. Tolkien.
Tolkien, yep. It's actually not available for print by itself. It comes inside, I'd have to look it up, but we'll put it in the show notes. But it comes inside a collection of some of his other works. But you can find it on Audible, which is actually a great place to look for it because it's 99 cents, I think, last I looked, or maybe $1.99, and only like 45 minutes, and very, very enjoyable and funny. But when we, why?
Well, because he's always trying to do this great thing.
Right. Yes,
he's working on this great magnum opus of this tree he's painting.
The coolest podcast ever.
The coolest podcast ever with a website and stuff. It was great. No. So he's trying to paint this big tree, and that's his life's work, he thinks. And it keeps on getting interrupted by people.
He's not really good at the tree, and he knows this about himself. He says these things about himself. But he knows he's really good at leaves.
Yeah.
If you know anything about Tolkien, you'll know that, like, if you can compare it to it is somewhat autobiographical of his perception of his own work and
the world.
So in the world that he's creating. Yeah.
But then he dies. Mm-hmm. He's, death comes one day. It's like, it's time to go. And he's like, but I haven't finished my painting. And he says, "Whoop, sorry, you got to go anyway." So he goes with him, and then by the time he gets, and this is not obviously a full endorsement of the entire book because it's totally Roman Catholic, but he gets through purgatory and then into the new earth, and you see this connection between what was his I don't know, the life that we now know and the life to come, mm-hmm. And how the work that he did blossoms, and it is the work that he did in terms of the painting mm-hmm. and the tree and all that, but it's more than that. The bigger part of life is not the life that he was trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. It was the interactions that happened through the inconveniences.
The interruptions.
So, the interruptions. That was life. Mm-hmm. The things that interrupted life were life itself, and they were the more important, consequential mm-hmm. things. And so coming out of this week, last week, I think the weekends didn't exist. That big inconvenience seems to be looming large, mm-hmm. maybe because we have the sort of we've been given the imagination to see it that way through these mm-hmm. literary things.
That's interesting because that's a whole nother point. I mean, it's kind of a sidetrack, but when we can read things, it's one of the reasons we tell good stories, read good stories, know scripture, know the stories in scripture as stories in history, as much as things for our edification, right? It's for both. But the story often draws us into an idea that we can then look for in our reality.
Mhm.
Right. And Leaf by Nigel definitely, I mean, I don't think it came to my mind during the frustration of like stopping what I was doing. And actually I was feeling really bad that morning too. And so it was rough. It was just a rough morning for me, period. But then knowing that that bigger picture could loom ahead, and even though like that's a lens now by which we see things, which I think as Christians we have to see it that way, right? That's we know this earth is not all there is. We know that the things that outlast our lives here are not the material things we get done, but it's generally related to the relationships that we grow and the people that come into our lives and the effect we have upon one another. And I think
not that the material things are unimportant either, because those are
No.
done for God under His
they're part of the
lordship and
story.
command. They're a part of the story.
They're vital to the story because they're the means by which He uses to grow those relationships.
It's because we're the paintbrush, not the artist. Ultimately. So we get inconvenienced and so forth. But I was making this beautiful brushstroke in this direction, and you just stopped and did this little flutter thing. It interrupted my great thing. But, no, that was actually the artist working. You're the paintbrush, not the artist.
It makes me do that analogy we talked about in another episode with the not being, our lives are not puzzle pieces that all just fit together perfectly, but we are a painting.
Yeah.
I think we might have even referenced like Nigel. Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is an ongoing.
It's predetermined in a sense of in the mind of God, but it's not. It's not predetermined in our own contingent world. It has to happen.
Right. And we can't predict necessarily every single nook and cranny and edge and shadow and accidental blooper
or
here
much
or
of
there.
Anything.
We can't really predict much of anything, but we can make a plan. So I mean, it doesn't mean that we live for the inconvenience. It doesn't mean we live for the inconveniences, right? No. It's not like we aim for them. You don't just stand around waiting for other things to happen to you. That is definitely not Keith's theme in life, in case anybody knows or wondered. But you aim at something, and then the magic word of I don't know, this century is pivot, right? Then you pivot.
Yeah.
But you shift and that is harder for some of us than others. I could talk a minute about the concept of vocation and how I had learned the word vocation and just thinking about it in context of Latin a little bit. And
vocare.
It's to call. Yep. And vocation being a calling. It's not, we think of vocation being, what your job is. And we've talked about jobs before, but a job is not your calling. A job is the place in which you fulfill your calling for a particular time or space or period of whatever, and purpose, but it isn't the overarching calling. The calling is greater than that. And to some degree, that calling isn't, again, a puzzle piece. It is it's a bigger artwork. So one time I just met somebody and I was like, so what's your husband's vocation? It's like the thing to ask, what do you do? What do you do for work? What's your job? And I wanted to fight against that because I understand, like, if somebody asked me, even at that time when you had the normal job that wasn't normal, that I still didn't ever feel comfortable saying like you did that particular job as though that was all you were. Because that never quantified you ever. And there were always other things going on. Anyway, I remember saying, she replied her answer and she said, so what about yours? What's your husband's calling? And it's like, well, as a family, we fly things mostly by the seat of our pants. Anyway, we should still have some plans. So there we are.
Goals.
We do.
Hashtag goals.
We do have goals.
You know what, though? This is going to be crazy. It's going to be the shortest podcast ever because it's late.
And it's the third time.
And honestly, it's the third time. Because we did this morning, and I'm telling you, it was the greatest podcast ever. And nobody's ever going to hear it because the mic wasn't on.
No audio was on. No audio. Not on the phone.
Not audio at all. No backup.
No hidden mics anywhere.
It was bad. 20-something minutes into it of brilliance, utter brilliance. Becky actually levitated for a while. It was nuts. Anyway,
I gotta make that face.
It's been real. It's been fun. Do stick around next week. We got Gregory Wilbur, and then after the new year, we're going to have George Grant. And
if you don't know who they are, you need to look them up. They've been on some other podcasts. George Grant is really he had one really great podcast of his own. Look for
the Stand Fast Cast.
The Stand Fast Cast, and Where Do We Go From Here, back in April of 2020. Seriously, so good.
Link in the show notes.
Yes, please listen to it.
But, cool. All right, so we'll see you guys later. Have fun.
Cheers.
This episode of the Stay at Work Home is brought to you by HeartlandBunkies.com. Come check out our full line of small cabin kits that can be easily assembled by a few friends or family in just a weekend for extra space for meaningful connection, or extra income, or a home office, a homeschool room, or whatever.